Greetings YouTube, greetings everyone, and please welcome back my guest, Ian Warner.
Hello there, YouTube.
And we've just finished watching Mummy on the Orient Express. I would say plus points. This was actually scary, strong concept for a monster. Reminded me of a couple of things. What the hell is that horror film that was originally Japanese? Ring! Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of Ring. Other plus points, liked the guest appearances. They didn't make the Frank Skinner character too comedic. I think that would have been tiresome. Foxes, who I'd never heard of, giving us a cover of Don't Stop Me Now. That was all good. The Jelly Babies are back. The Doctor is back to offering people, which might be a Tom Baker reference because the last time there were mummies in Doctor Who was Pyramids of Mars, of course. Negative points. Actually, this came up in the previous episode as well. Why does any phone have the timey-wimey quality, which in the Davis era, the Doctor had to, jiggery-pokery your phone for you to phone someone in your own era, even when you time travelled. Now it's like the Doctor set the TARDIS to automatically change your phone, so you have a timey-wimey mobile. There's never been a line to explain that, as far as I'm aware. The fact that Clara is in this episode, which they tried to hide, but a photo leaked, because if you don't notice, she wasn't in the Next Time trailer or anything. And I think maybe it would have been an idea to have like a Clara light episode, then a Doctor light episode focusing on Clara, something to just, but at least, yeah.
You say that. It's interesting because this came up on the BBC's YouTube channel. The fact that they said that when they finally admitted that Clara was in the episode, in the preview chat with Peter Capaldi, what happened was a lot of the fanboys were like, "Oh, I wanted a Doctor only or Doctor Light episode," and I was like, "Well, really? There's only ever been one episode without a companion as such, and that was the Deadly Assassin or storyline, and that was the Deadly Assassin. And I don't think they're going to do that again until sadly Tom Baker's no longer with us. I can't see them doing that."
Well, actually, David Tennant, in his final year, didn't have a companion.
Yeah, but he always had a companion in those supposedly companion-free episodes. He had that I'm totally not a cross between Batman and Catwoman honest character. And he had Adelaide, who would have been a brilliant companion if she hadn't shot herself. So, yeah. I don't count those as companion-like episodes or companionless episodes, because the fact is they immediately wrote in a sort of substitute companion.
Yes, I suppose. Well, if you think about it, though, Midnight only had Donna at the beginning and the end. I was thinking they could have something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
And don't forget, the Lion, the Doctor, the Widow, and the Wardrobe only has Amy and Rory at the very end.
Well, yeah, and it's as I said, you've got another surrogate companion in the whole family.
Yeah.
I mean, if Alexander Armstrong wasn't trapped on a plane, he'd probably be in it as well. So.
Well, yeah, okay. But I just sort of thought, well, yeah, at least when I first saw Clara, because she's in it straight just after the credits, she's there. She does always look gorgeous in period costumes. That's a plus. Gotta love Jenna Coleman in period costumes. Every era seems to suit her. In fact, yes, her in the red dress as a Maid Marian kind of thing.
Yeah, that's become something of an internet sensation, that picture.
Yeah. I think she looks hot in 1920s gear as well. And basically, so I've lost my thread slightly. It's at least they do acknowledge the blowout at the end, and a few weeks have gone by. The major negative here, and don't get me wrong, because I thought the concept for the mummy was scary, and this episode scared me when Listen didn't. Listen relies on you relating to that nightmare, which I personally don't. And people keep saying that it was clever that there's a question mark hanging over Listen. And can I just say, if a writer not explaining everything counts as clever writing, then Stephen Moffat is a genius by that standard by this point. But this, actually, well, they probably, I've only watched it the once, I mean, whether things were exactly explained, but I mean, you had a solid high concept for this monster, even if it does require, as usual, quite a suspension of disbelief. It was all solved in half an hour. I looked at the clock. It's solved half an hour in, leaving a quarter of an hour of character stuff to do with the Doctor and Clara, and stuff to do with the season as a whole. I might be slightly exaggerating, but maybe my clock's a bit fast or something. But the point is, that's how it felt. That the final third of the episode was not the plot of the episode.
Yeah, because that's one thing. That's one thing a lot of people find surprising about the classic series, is just how little link there is between stories. And how there's, or if it's there at all. I mean, the classic example of there actually being a link in classic stories is the season with Curse of Fenric in it, and Curse of Fenric, Ghost Light, and basically the Ace season, where Ace goes through various different problems and comes out stronger by the end of it. And unfortunately, that was when the classic series ended, so we never really got to, unless you count the Cartmel Master Plan stuff as canon, which some people refuse to do now, unfortunately.
Yes, it was only this year that I find out all that stuff about the Doctor training Ace up to go to the Academy and become a Time Lord.
Yeah, that actually makes all of his sort of the complete character change he goes. Well, it's not really a character change, but the sort of the way he becomes more sort of distant and very nasty towards Ace, and that whole last season is actually explained if you actually take that into account. And the whole lung barrow thing, where they're actually delving into the Doctor's origins, would have been fascinating to see.
Yeah.
And the genetic loom still makes more sense than Russell T. Davies insisting that, like every other species in the galaxy, Time Lords are sex maniacs.
Yes. But in any case, I've said what I think were the pluses and minuses to Mummy on the Orient Express. What do you think?
I like the idea of the seemingly benign monster. Well, it's not. By the time you explain it all, it's explain it all as it was just this soldier who was trapped with his weird chrono vampire device dinghy, and that was really, really quite cute. And the fact it shows this very anti-soldier Doctor actually showing a little sort of sympathy and respect for a soldier, and it's certainly a good news for Danny Pink there.
Yes, that angle hadn't even occurred to me, but yes, you're right. Yes,
and I think you were very right about Frank Skinner. Frank Skinner as that just character coming out of nowhere and seeming to have worked out a lot more about the Doctor than just your average random person, but it turns out not to have. It's quite interesting. Plus, just being an engineer, just a general sort of very typical sort of British working class engineer type. And pretty much, and the period costume really helped with the character, I must say. When it comes to comic actors appearing Doctor Who, I think when it comes to in serious roles, that's got to be one of the most interesting casting choices since Ken Dodd in what's it?
Delta and the Bannermen.
Yeah.
Yes, well, we try not to think about that.
I'm
But yes,
just saying that I mean, Ken Dodd was actually quite creepy in that. He wasn't as well. Obviously, he was trying to be funny, but he was actually quite creepy in that. So.
oh, okay, I'll have to watch it again, maybe. I do remember Hale and Pace, but Hale and Pace were definitely not playing serious characters. But because they were in survival, weren't they? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, when you really look at the writing, they did give the Frank Skinner character gags, but it wasn't, it could have been really painful to try and put comic relief into that story. And actually, it's the first time I've actually watched Frank Skinner and thought he could act at all. When he was in his own sitcom called Shane, I don't know if you remember Shane, which I didn't think was an especially good sitcom, but somehow I just thought, yeah, he really kind of he sacrificed the acting of the character for the sake of delivery of gags. Mm-hmm. But here, they're not directing him to be funny, he's just acting. And actually, he takes to it really naturally.
Yeah, very similar with Reeves and Mortimer in their Randall Hochkirk Deceased remake.
Oh, yeah.
Because although they put in a couple of sort of funny characters to keep them, and surreal characters for them to play as well as playing the leads, and again, like the really random, high-pitched voice character that Vic Reeves played, appeared randomly halfway through the first season, but it's very strange how they'd done no proper acting at all, and they said in interviews, we done no proper acting at all, and we were totally not, and we were in there, and they were thrown in the deep end with Charles Dance, Emilia Fox, all these big name actors. Thinking that they were basically Morecambe and Wise, the new Morecambe and Wise doing Randall Hochkirk Deceased, and they were going to make a mess of it. And Vic Reeves said the moment he realised that acting was for him was in the second season, and that was a sequence where, for a brief moment, Emilia Fox's character, who's the fiance of Marty, could just about see his sort of ghostly outline. Due to this drug she was on. And he had to explain to her that he's not really there, it's a hallucination, despite the fact that basically all the time throughout the previous series and throughout this, particularly in this second series, essentially he spent it moaning about Jeff getting all cozy with his fiance, or ex-fiance. We're never split up, but you're dead. So...
Yeah, I didn't see much of that. I'm gonna have to watch it. I never really watched it.
It's worth it just for the first episode.
Oh, really? Okay.
The first episode, you have Charles Dance and David Tennant as the main villains, and David Tennant is absolutely insane. He is basically playing it's like a really bad sort of Damien Hirst parody character, only he's Scottish and very Scottish, and totally out of his mind. He really sort of hams it up, but at the same time you can totally buy him as a person within this slightly sort of surreal world. That's the thing with the series. It wasn't quite like sort of League of Gentlemen creepy or completely surreal or anything like that. It was just real enough that you could buy it, but at the same time there was something sort of slightly uncanny valley about it. It really worked. But yeah, it's a good series. It's well worth picking up because some of the set pieces are really well done, and just generally it's Tom Baker and Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer as the core cast is brilliant. And Emilia Fox, of course.
Okay, so what would you say were your favourite moments of this episode, and most any sort of interesting observations? I wonder what else I missed.
The little timer in the corner. whenever somebody started seeing the mummy. Start a clock. That was a really nice innovation. And again, it seems like a very Tony Jordan thing to do. I still don't know if he's actually written an episode of Doctor Who yet, but it did seem like something he'd do, because he does a lot of things with real time. He also, like Moffat, does a lot of things with retrospectives, where you think they're going to walk, you think the crew are basically walking into a complete trap, but it turns out they planned for it, and they flash back to how they worked around it. But I think if you, as I mentioned with Hustle and the last time we spoke about this, if you want an idea of just how completely crazy that series can get, there's 2 episodes you should really look up. There's one where they basically, there's this really nasty sort of Rupert Murdoch or Paul Darkrat type character. In fact, Paul Darkrat appears in that episode because the character there is basically like a rival of his, and is even more nasty than he is. And this person caused a friend of theirs, who's a really nice person, to attempt suicide. So they need to get him back somehow. And the idea is sell him like a really trashy tabloid story. And Ash comes up, that's Robert Glenister, comes up with this plan, which is to feed him a conspiracy theory about the royals, which is, what if the Queen Mum wasn't actually the Queen Mum? And the way that one is built up is amazing. And there's also another one where they've got to make a statue disappear from a bank vault, which is absolutely amazing how they manage it.
Okay. Maybe I'll get around to that when I've watched all the Randall and Hopkirks. But what? Like I say, yes, it does have Tom Baker in it. I still didn't watch it.
Yes, like a mentor ghost to Marty. They never had a character like that in the original, because you never really saw much of the underworld. It was just Marty would show up and help him out. You never really saw what happened when he wasn't talking to Jeff, or when he wasn't available. Whereas they do build up an underworld, because it's Charlie Higson who wrote it. And he builds up this underworld that's includes not only the Tom Baker tutor ghost type character, which is absolutely he's a brilliant character because of the fact that, the way he introduces himself, and he says, "Oh, of course I can look like this," and he turns into this big sort of nega spike type monster, or like this, and he turns into different forms, and then he says, "But of course, I found this form more comfortable," and he says, "Of course, this isn't what I really look like." "All right. What do you really look like?" "Believe me, Marty, you don't want to know." And they both turn to the camera and like grin, and you see the same grin on both Vic Reeves and Tom Baker's face at the same time, and it's so incredibly creepy and hilarious at the same time.
Okay. Now, you just reminded me, because you mentioned Stephen Moffat. Of course, this episode wasn't written by Stephen Moffat. But I did notice the line the Doctor actually says, "Are you my mummy?" And it makes perfect sense and has a whole different meaning. And to those of us, because I'm a big fan of The Empty Child, as you know, because I've cosplayed as a gas mask zombie.
Yes.
And so, yes, "Are you my mummy?" is back. That was a nice touch. And, another thing. Because obviously you hear about an episode with a title like this, and there's a YouTube channel called The Who Addicts Reviews, and they said something like, like they think that the Doctor Who writers' office has 2 dartboards, one covered in names of monsters, and one covered in locations and time periods. And that so you end up with episodes like Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, Robot of Sherwood. So I was expecting Mummy on the Orient Express to be another popcorn episode.
Yeah.
And
it does read like that in the title. It's a bit like all of those people who went to see Snakes on a Plane discover it's a mediocre action film rather than actually being a so bad it's good stupid fest.
Right.
A lot of stuff was actually added to make it more stupid in post. and they actually refilmed bits in post, including the famous line. Was refilmed in post because of the fact that they wanted to make it more ridiculous, because everybody was expecting it to be more ridiculous. But actually, it was pegged as like a sort of semi-serious comedy film like True Lies.
Okay.
Along those sort of lines, and it comes across kind of a bit muddled because of that. But hey, it's Samuel L. Jackson, so it still works.
Aha. Oh, okay.
You can put him in anything and it'll make it work. Even if it's like RoboCop, where of course RoboCop was great in the 80s because it was funny. Now, of course, we're living in that world, so it's not so funny.
Oh dear. But then again, yeah, this episode was too good to have a title like Mummy on the Orient Express, and it's the only one that's actually been scary for me at all.
Well, I can't think of a title that is a bit that doesn't sort of give the game away as the final mystery. I mean,
the foretold stare.
I suppose so, or 66 seconds.
Yeah, that could work.
I was thinking more because of course now I've seen it and now I know that it is a soldier lost in time. I was constantly thinking of all these sort of exact references to the unknown soldier and that, but it kind of that would spoil the final sort of point, which was, as I said, it was very well constructed, and bringing that sort of running theme up in a series which, as I said, we've established that this Doctor really does not like soldiers at all.
Yeah.
Matt Smith's Doctor had sort of a love-hate relationship with people like Unit and that turning up, and he really, really did lay into Kate a couple of times. But he wasn't nearly as hostile as the 12th. And the 12th is to the point where I think if he were trapped in the same situation as the 3rd, he probably would tell Unit exactly where to stick it.
Well, we do know that we are... sorry, spoiler warning, everyone, but we do know we are going to see Kate this season.
Who? Oh, Kate. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Kate Stewart, yeah.
I do like her rather strange fangirl daughter. What's her name?
Oh, Osgood. I didn't know Osgood was her daughter.
I'm pretty sure it was mentioned a couple of times.
Oh. No, I did not know that at all. And yes, she's back as well, isn't she?
Yeah.
Oh, I just thought she worked there. I didn't realise they were...
No. They're mother and daughter, apparently.
So Osgood is the Brigadier's granddaughter.
Yeah.
And that's how she got the scarf, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's also probably all the sort of stuff that Granddaddy was exposed to has skipped a generation and led to the fact that she's got so many illnesses on top of each other.
Well, yes. Yes, you get some, tough guy, asthmatic nerd.
Yeah.
But okay. One thing, because obviously we had a bit more of Danny, we had a bit more arguing and reflection and stuff like that, but we didn't have any. Can I just call the character Mary Poppins?
Oh,
like, if I complete Missy, the gatekeeper of the Nethersphere, I'm gonna say this, right? If I were tempted to, because sometimes I get frustrated with Doctor Who, a lot of people do, and sort of do I still want to, not that I ever would hang up my scarf, but if I were one of those people thinking, I would want to keep watching this season to find out if Mary Poppins is God. Because I'm looking at this.
Because Alan Moore claims that she is. Have you heard of the latest League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic?
Oh.
Because for those who don't know, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it started with basically Alan Moore took the Justice League concept of teaming up superheroes with literary heroes of the Victorian era. Of course, he couldn't stay in the Victorian era very long, so he had to keep the thing moving and had to keep various characters alive, and to the point where now we're in 2009, and Malcolm Tucker is the director of communications. We've gone through several James Bonds because he got in trouble for his one of his books set in the 50s because he references a character called Jimmy, who is a complete... Basically, imagine everything that critics of the Bond series see Bond as.
Right.
As a character. And that, he wrote in Jimmy. He called him Jimmy, and he referred to his father, Campion Bond, because Campion Bond was in the original League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, was the kind of fixer. And it really didn't go down well with the Fleming estate, but
right.
They also have Emma Peel in there, who's now head of MI5, and it was just a complete... But throughout they had this building plot line with a coming Antichrist, who turned out to be Harry Potter. Clearly, they didn't use Harry Potter's name, but it was very clearly Harry Potter. And him, Mary Poppins comes out of the sky and turns him into a puddle of goo, and then walks off.
Right. Okay. There were definitely no drugs involved in the creative process.
Oh, I don't even know with Alan Moore these days. He really is something. I mean, his 60s League of Extraordinary Gentlemen's worth it just to get a vague idea of what he sees the 60s as, because it is like watching. It is like sort of watching. Cross between mix between Woodstock footage and the actual sort of films of the time. So what if the films of the time weren't constrained by the censorship of the time, sort of thing?
Oh, okay. I do know. Well, I heard something about apparently Neil Gaiman claims that Mary Poppins started out as Jesus Christ's nanny. That was her first job.
Oh. Yeah, I think they may have been at the same pub at some point. Because they bounce these. I mean, a lot of British comic writers bounce these ideas off each other all the time. Oh, there's a Simpsons comic recently where Willie, the Scottish gamekeeper, takes the Simpsons around his family's little house in Glasgow. And he's like telling them how similar Scotland is to the US. And he says, we've even got our own comic book creators. And there's Grant Morrison and Mark Miller standing there. And they immediately turn around, look at each other and start fighting. Because they're both famous Scottish ones and they don't like each other. So they both agree to appear in this comic, beating the snot out of each other.
Okay, then. Okay, well, like I did with James last week, I'd like to, because I haven't seen Doctor Who Extras yet, I don't think you have either, because it goes out after the episode, and then we can have a little mini discussion about that. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, folks, we'll be back in a sec. So, we've just got back from watching Doctor Who Extra, and I've got to say, watching that, I'm very keen on the guests, and I would like to see more of Perkins, the Frank Skinner character, and actually, if only Foxes had been a bit more, even though I didn't know who she was before Doctor Who.
Yes, but I think the reason that they probably minimise Fox's part is because, of course, the history of having your singer in a long sort of acting role in Doctor Who. No, I wasn't impressed with Kylie. Especially seeing as she's referenced in a previous episode with Rose. So Kylie Minogue exists in the same universe as the Kylie Minogue character.
Oh, you can get away with that kind of thing. It's not the first time Doctor Who's been metatextual. I
I
mean,
suppose, yeah.
Ace nearly seeing Doctor Who, for one
Oh,
thing.
that was quite funny, but that was funny. That was really done, and
Okay.
they actually did it well. This wasn't so much. I didn't really think that. I thought really that character could have been played by pretty much anyone, and it wouldn't have changed it really. And there are plenty of better actresses out there. You didn't really need to go for the star name.
The odd thing is, she is actually, for some reason, qualified to drive a JCB, which she does in the episode.
Oh
So
yes.
they'd have had to have got a stunt double if if it was someone else.
True. Yeah. But as again, she's qualified to drive that. So are a lot of very unlikely people. I mean, there's members of the aristocracy who can drive Jolly because of the war. So,
Ah,
but
okay.
it's as I said, it was I didn't agree with her casting in that. I mean, she did an okay job, but it was okay. I mean, that episode was just all shades of okay, really.
Yeah, and another reason why I didn't expect much from Mummy on the Orient Express, because it's just, a space.
It's the same gig,
yeah.
It's the same species. I was half expecting what's his name, Max, the chap who was behind the Titanic.
Italian, whatever it was called, yeah.
Yeah, with his little gold tooth and his cybernetics, and that was a fun villain. But he just.
I liked how Mr. Copper was supposed to research how humans celebrate Christmas, and he gets every detail wrong.
Yes, and Clive Swift, of course. I did actually run into Clive Swift at one point.
What was he like?
Pretty much exactly every character he plays on television. He is that sort of mild-mannered chap, really.
Really?
Yeah.
But you do know that infamous interview where he came across like a complete bellend, right?
I'm not aware of that one.
I'll have to find that for you. He must have been having a really bad day when Doctor Who magazine. It's such a car crash of an interview. He's relentlessly rude throughout, and you're like, how did they print this? It's a page of him just being needlessly rude to a journalist.
Well, actually, the funny thing was, I saw him before his new Who appearance, and I believe I may have mentioned his old Who appearance where he plays a psychotic mortician who's like the complete opposite of every other character he's ever played, and he did it really well. And he says, nobody ever reminds me of that role. Why don't they remind me of that role? It's brilliant.
Oh, okay.
And I think is it Revelation of the Daleks season?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, with his utterly psychotic mortician. And I can't remember the actress who played like his devoted assistant. I was trying to work out who was crazy. It's a bit like Joker and Harley Quinn. You're trying to work out which one's crazier.
But I'm thinking. Of course, I grew up with that serial, and it was before he did the keeping up appearances. But the worst part of the interview is when, I'm not even sure I want to repeat this, is when he's asked if do people ever shout Richard at you in the street, because his character was called, the long-suffering husband was called Richard. So does anyone ever shout Richard at you? And his actual reply, honest to God, was, sometimes I just turn the fuck off. Why did they print that?
I'll have to find. I've got it. I've actually got the piece of paper for it, but I haven't actually got the. I don't know if they actually did a digital version of it. It's probably in the Times archive somewhere, but it's an interview with Tom Baker, and it's what they call a life in the day. Where basically they will follow a celebrity around on an everyday, but it just talking about like their everyday lives. And they follow Tom Baker around, and seriously, the stuff he says, it makes him sound even more sort of. It makes him even more strange than his stage persona is. And talking about Tom Baker's stage persona, my old support tutor at school, his daughter, when she was about 8, they went to see him in Pirates of Penzance, where he was playing a completely different character from the Doctor, and it was a really different. And she was old enough. Yeah. She was about 8. She was old enough to understand he's an actor. He plays lots of different roles. But the moment they ran into him on the tube afterwards, he immediately turned the Doctor voice on, because that voice, is now his voice, because he's used it so much, wasn't his original speaking voice. He turned the Doctor voice on, and he walked up to her and said, "Would you like a jelly baby?"
Excellent.
And it's one of her. She's now actually a special constable working for the art department of the Metropolitan Police.
Oh. Right. Well, you've seen your first Doctor Who extra. So what was your thought on this show?
I think, Doctor Who Confidential was kind of milking it a bit. Extra really gets the balance right, and they get the right number of people to talk about it. And I don't know why they didn't talk to the writer about the one, because the last week's one, because this time the writer was like, half of the episode was just talking to that writer.
Yeah.
He seemed to be really into his Universal monsters. And he was like, "Oh yeah, the mummy's like the poor cousin of the monsters, and I wanted to give him a better rep." And I can totally relate, because there is a board game out there called Monster Mayhem by it used to be by White Wolf Publishing. I'm not sure it's still in print because White Wolf went under. But basically, each one of you takes a classic Universal monster. So one of you is the vampire, one of you is the mummy, one of you is the zombie.
Yeah.
You go around this town and you've got to pick up victims, and different victims have got different scores and different stats. So if you're a zombie, you want brains, you want to go after the professors. But if you're a vampire, you want blood, so you want to go after the cheerleaders. And you can fight each other over victims, so it gets very tactical, and it's like a sort of a very strange mashup of sort of risk mixed with diplomacy. It's really, really strange game, but it's a lot of fun.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think it's time for final thoughts and goodbyes. I'm going to say thankfully we had a scary episode, because I wasn't scared by Listen, but at least I thought this was scary. And yes, Ian, your final thought and goodbye.
My final thoughts, it was. I'll admit that you're not entirely wrong, where it's been a bit of a lackluster start to the season at times. This was a real return to form, and I like the writer's attitude. Having seen that Doctor Who extra, I do like the writer's attitude to the monster he was depicting. The monster was brilliant. The monster was a practical effect. Being a practical effect really helped, because if that had been a CGI mummy, it would have been ridiculous. The fact they went to the trouble of sculpting that resin sort of bandages and bones over a lycra suit was a major plus point.
Yeah.
And just generally a very good episode. And it's nice to have a mummy episode that doesn't reference Sutek.
Of course.
When they do like classic monsters, the good thing about Doctor Who, I find, especially with New Who, is if they go for a classic mythical monster, they won't necessarily make it the same iteration. I mean, even in the classic series, we had vampires appear several times. We had actual Dracula appear at one point. in the Hartnell eras.
Yeah.
We had the vampires who were sworn enemies of the Time Lords in Underworld, and we had vampire standing stones. Only Tom Baker could make a story like that work.
Of course, and State of Decay had vampires and the Great Vampire, and Hemovores kind of count. Well, they're certainly vampiric.
Yeah.
So yeah, quite a few. I see. Vampires of Venice always slightly irritates me because you have them floating outside the window, and they don't do an exterior shot, actually with an effect showing them floating, and I just sort of say that's a bit lazy. Because obviously they're just standing on something. So, I want you to cut to the outside just for a few seconds. It was like, no, can't be bothered, or we ran out of money. We had enough money to go to, was it Prague they shot that?
Probably. Prague stands in for most of Europe now in filming terms because it's very easy to film there. It's not difficult to get permits and things, and because a lot of that really, really bad Dungeons and Dragons film was filmed in Prague. The one with Jeremy Irons overacting in such a utterly immense way. You really should see that if you're a fan of really bad movies.
Dungeons and Dragons. Oh, okay.
It's the first one. There's actually 3 Dungeons and Dragons films now, I believe.
I've not seen any of them. Wow.
There's the first one, which there is the chap from Lois and Clark, New Adventures of Superman, who plays Jimmy Olsen, is the hero, and that's just how bad it is. And Jeremy Irons is the villain, and he's really overacting. There's the second one where they bring the henchman of Jeremy Irons back as the main villain. It doesn't quite work. And then there's one that's like it's mostly fan-made, or it's mostly fan-funded and fan-made, and you can tell because they're actually using Dungeons & Dragons terminology and actually Dungeons & Dragons settings and storylines, and it's absolutely nothing to do with the mess they had with the previous two.
Aha. Okie dokie. Right. Well, hopefully. I don't know the name of next week's episode. Whatever next week's Doctor Who episode is, maybe I'll have you back. But certainly I think I'll keep doing the podcasts. And so, it's good night from him, and it's good night from me.
Good night.